You're listening to the Beyond Measurements and Image podcast, where we build healthier lifestyles, elevate your well-being, and transform lives. Welcome to BMI.
I'm your host, Dr. Drew Crawford. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and obesity medicine specialist. Thank you for joining me today on Beyond Measurements and Image. Today we're going to talk about creatine. Creatine is a supplement that we've probably all heard about. And not unlike the GLP-1s, every time you hear about creatine, it seems like it is the perfect supplement. And it is very well studied, and it does seem to be very safe. But I thought today I would just take a little bit of time to explain creatine, what the purpose of it is, how it works, what some of the side effects are, and what the benefits could be. So let's just start by what is creatine. Creatine is a product that's made by our bodies from amino acids. The particular amino acids used to make creatine are arginine, methionine, and glycine. With a typical American diet, we take in enough protein with those particular amino acids to make about 1 to 2 grams of creatine a day. So creatine helps your muscles to produce energy, particularly during like heavy lifting or intense exercises, to some extent running, biking. But really, we see it most often in bodybuilders and muscle mass building adventures, although it's really not limited to that. But it does appear that it enhances strength. It also enhances some muscle build to some extent. We'll go into that in a little more detail. And then it does show some improved performance metrics in various different things, including muscle hypertrophy and endurance. So 95% of creatine is found in the muscles, and the remaining 5% is found in the brain, and in men found in testes. Creatine is stored as phosphocreatine in the muscles, and it basically functions as a stored energy that helps to make ATP. Let's talk a little bit about ATP. For those of you that have taken biology, you probably remember the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And that was a complex cycle that we've all memorized and forgot multiple times. But basically, ATP is the body's energy currency. In the mitochondria where energy is produced, there is these stored bonds of phosphorus to adenosine. With ATP, it's adenosine triphosphate. So you have an adenosine molecule and you have 3 phosphates attached to it. And the second and third phosphate actually have high energy bonds. And so when you cleave the phosphate off of ATP, you release a lot of that energy. And then the molecule is ultimately recharged, so to speak, when that phosphate is then reattached. But the energy comes when that third phosphate bond is cleaved from the adenosine molecule. And when that happens, it turns it into what we call ADP, adenosine diphosphate. And then that second one also has a fair amount of energy. And if it's cleaved off, it becomes AMP, adenosine monophosphate. AMP, ADP, and ATP are all part of the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, all of which occurs in the mitochondria, which is well known as the powerhouse of the cell. And ATP is the currency of energy for the body. When we take in creatine, that ultimately is converted to phosphocreatine, and that phosphate that is attached to the creatine is there to then supply the ATP. So that's the purpose of it. It's a naturally occurring process. Like I said, it's made from 3 amino acids, arginine, glycine, and methionine. And remember, amino acids, when you string a bunch of amino acids together, you have a protein. And then the individual building blocks are amino acids. So those 3 amino acids are what our body uses to make creatine. And then creatine then in turn is stored in our muscles and is basically there to help make ATP. If you have additional energy stores available, then that can definitely help you to increase the total volume of work. So if you're doing a heavy lifting workout where you're trying to build muscle mass, right, the creatine itself doesn't directly cause muscle hypertrophy, but what it does is it gives your body additional stores of phosphate to add to the ATP. So you ultimately could be able to increase your workload either by more reps or, if not more reps, higher volume or a heavier load. And so if you increase your total volume of work, that can help with muscle hypertrophy ultimately. It can also help improve cell signaling between the cells via hormones, which then can improve muscle repair and muscle strength. And then it also decreases muscle breakdown. It decreases myostatin, which is a molecule that basically inhibits skeletal muscle growth. So if you decrease something that is inhibiting skeletal muscle growth, in turn, you're working to maybe increase muscle growth or at least take the brakes off. Creatine decreases myostatin, which then kind of helps you to increase your muscle building. Now, this also works in other circumstances, right? It also works in endurance, right? If you're a cyclist on a time trial, they've done studies with that. Time trial is just when a cyclist goes a set distance for time, and you try to go as much as you can. When the studies have been conducted, what they found is that the athletes that took creatine prior to this have a little more endurance, and they just have more of that phosphocreatine, which then can kick in and help. So not only does it help with muscle building, but it also helps with endurance to some extent. So what all else can creatine do? Well, if you listen to the different podcasts and you listen to, the things that everybody says, seemingly there's nothing that it doesn't do, right? Not only does it increase your volume of work and increase cell signaling and decrease this myostatin, but it also seems to have some effects on the brain, maybe to help with Alzheimer's or possible Parkinson's disease. It may have a role in ALS, possibly in traumatic brain injuries or epilepsy. And it does appear to improve some issues with short-term memory. Remember, 5% of all the creatine that we take is actually stored in the brain, and in men in the testes. And some would argue that for men, the brain and the testes are one and the same. But the remaining 95% is in the muscle. So you got to remember that, the majority of this is a muscle-based benefit. But there does appear to be a fair amount of cognitive-based benefits as well that are being studied. Now, let's talk just a little bit about the effects that it also has. There's been some reports that there's some improvement in blood sugar control and possible fat metabolism. So let me just talk about this for a minute. So when it's reported that creatine helps control blood sugar, that's not exactly accurate. But one of the things that creatine does do is it increases a hormone called insulin growth factor 1. And insulin growth factor 1 is extremely powerful. It does a lot. In fact, if we could isolate insulin growth factor 1 and somehow figure out a way to take it, right, to mix it as a powder with water and drink it like we do our creatine, then we probably would be better off than just taking the creatine. But one of the things that insulin growth factor 1 does is that it actually enhances insulin sensitivity. So in other words, the insulin that comes from our pancreas that then goes around and helps to drive blood sugar into the cells, right? It helps to increase cellular uptake of the sugar. And when it does that, it decreases the blood sugar. So insulin growth factor 1 actually enhances insulin sensitivity. In that regard, creatine does have some benefit to glucose metabolism and control of blood sugar, but it's sort of second order, right? It's really the IGF-1 that's doing that, but the creatine helps to stimulate and increase the body's insulin growth factor 1. But then also insulin growth factor 1 increases protein synthesis and muscle growth, which is also part of what we know creatine kind of helps to do as well. And then to some extent, there's some fat metabolism regulation that's controlled by IGF-1. IGF-1 is a completely independent entity from creatine. When our body either makes it or when we take exogenous creatine as a supplement, we get some of the benefits from IGF-1. So that's how, in addition to the muscle building properties as well as the cognitive properties, when you hear that there's some benefit to blood glucose control and fat metabolism, that's the mechanism that you're hearing about. So the question here is, who benefits from creatine supplement? And again, when you listen to everything on social media and all the different podcasts and all the information that's out there to consume, it sounds like everybody would benefit from it. And to be honest with you, there's very little downside to it, so it's probably not bad if everybody took it. But particularly the three groups of people that seem to benefit the most from it would be athletes, for the reasons described above, and then elderly patients, particularly patients 65 years and older. And the reason that they benefit from it is as we age, we tend to have muscle breakdown. And when you have significant muscle breakdown, it's called sarcopenia. We've talked about that before. That's one of the instances where BMI isn't terribly effective, because if you just have massive muscle wasting from sarcopenia, just from being old, when we've seen these old people and all their muscle mass is just gone, well, then the BMI is not super accurate, right? Because it doesn't really tell us everything there is about body composition. But when you have muscle breakdown, right, if you can do something to help reverse that or help to inhibit that breakdown, then it's going to help you a lot just in terms of daily activities and being able to move and move about, step up and down. And so older adults who particularly are at risk for sarcopenia benefit from creatine. And now that creatine needs to also be sort of coupled with protein intake. But then also, a lot of times the elderly get dehydrated, and there's some properties with creatine that show that it increases your ability to maintain hydration a little bit better. And then, of course, the memory benefits that we've talked about as well, particularly helping with short-term memory. Remember, patients who have dementia and Alzheimer's, they have preserved long-term memory You can ask them something about their childhood and they can tell you in incredible detail about that. But you ask them what they had for lunch and oftentimes they can't remember. Athletes benefit from it. Older adults benefit from it. And then vegetarians and vegans would benefit from it a lot because remember, it's made from proteins. And not that vegetarians and vegans don't get any proteins, but they tend to have a relatively low protein diet, definitely much less so than like people that are on the carnivore diet. And so you need those proteins to get that 1 to 2 grams that your body naturally synthesizes. So vegetarians tend to benefit from it. So athletes, older adults, and vegetarians are the 3 big groups that benefit from it, but really we all do. So the question is it safe? Right? Is there any downside? And there really doesn't appear to be a big downside. It actually appears to be quite safe. There were some reports that maybe it was dangerous in patients with kidney disease and liver disease. So let me just address those. So actually in liver disease, it looks like creatine can be somewhat beneficial in patients who have fatty liver disease. The exact mechanism of action isn't known. But it's interesting also, recently the FDA has approved GLP-1, specifically Wegovy, for patients that have fatty liver disease. And what's interesting about that is that there's no receptors for GLP-1 in the liver. But yet still, when you look at the studies, they do appear to legitimately show some improvement in fatty liver disease. Same is true with creatine, right? It doesn't necessarily show improvement to the same extent. And it's a supplement, so it hasn't gone through as a drug, hasn't gone through the FDA as a drug, but rather as a medical food. So I don't want to make any clear statements that creatinine helps unequivocally with fatty liver disease, but it does appear that there is some trend toward that, and studies are ongoing looking at that as well. And then in terms of kidney function, so there's a byproduct of muscle breakdown called creatinine, right? It's different than creatine. Creatine is the supplement that we're taking. Creatine is the molecule that is made by our body that then stores as phosphocreatine that helps us to build energy, right? Helps to make ATP. Creatinine, right? It's almost the same word, but it's different, right? Creatinine is a byproduct of muscle breakdown and it's filtered through the kidneys. So a lot of times patients will go in and they'll get their blood drawn, and the 2 tests that just kind of is used as a screening exam for how your kidneys are functioning are, one test is called the BUN, the blood urea nitrogen, and the other is the creatinine, not the creatine, but the creatinine. If that's built up, if the creatinine levels are built up, that tells us that the normal breakdown of our muscles isn't being cleared through our kidneys, and so it builds up in our bloodstream. And when that happens, it signals to the doc like, oh, kidneys aren't functioning as well. And they can go on and do another test like the glomerular filtration rate or other such tests that would help them better to discern if in fact something's going on with the kidneys or not. But when you take creatine, that sometimes can elevate your creatinine levels. Let me talk about that in just a minute. The majority of the creatinine that's taken over the counter is what's called creatinine monohydrate. And when you look at the studies, creatinine monohydrate does not show a significant increase in the creatine levels in patients that take it. But there is a little bump up. But in patients that take creatine ethyl ester, right, that's another compound, creatine ethyl ester, that's another way to get creatine. When patients are on creatine ethyl ester, their creatinine levels are about 3 times the upper limits of normal. Now, it doesn't really mean that there's anything wrong with their kidneys. It's just the way that things are processed. But if you do have an elevated creatinine level, just be prepared that your physician is going to chase that down, or hopefully they'll chase that down to make sure there's no other kidney impairments. Doesn't appear to create problems for livers or kidneys. It appears to be generally safe. And we know the patients that benefit from it. So what are the side effects? Well, the main side effects are nausea, bloating, and diarrhea. And then sometimes a little bit of water retention. When you start taking it, if you're going to have side effects, that's when you tend to have them. It's most often with nausea. But it appears that most patients do quite well with it over time. Most patients don't develop problems, and the typical way that they take it is they take it about 5 grams a day. And it appears to be safe to take it at that level. Right? When they've looked at studies, they've looked at patients that have been on 25 grams daily for 14 days, and that appeared to be safe. Then they looked at patients that were supplementing with 4 to 5 grams daily for 18 months, and that appeared to be safe. And now they're looking at patients that have done 10 grams daily for 5 years, and that appears to be safe. So the current data that we have, it appears to be safe. But when you're taking about 5 grams daily, that seems to be a sweet spot where patients can tolerate it without having significant nausea. And if you do have nausea, a lot of times if you just stick on it, it'll kind of resolve itself, but you can sort of vary the dose. But 10 grams daily kind of looks to be the level that's sort of maybe the upper limits of where we'd want to push on a regular basis. No doubt there are a lot of bodybuilders that take significantly more than this, and we just don't have all the studies that we need to know about that as of yet. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to talk about creatine and how it might benefit us and what the upside and the downside would be to it. There does not appear to be a lot of downside to it, and there does appear to be some benefits. Oftentimes these supplements are really pushed hard, whether it's creatine or pre-workout or amino acids. And sometimes the science is there and sometimes it's a little sketchy and, oftentimes you don't know what you're getting. I do think that when you get it from outside the country, you're just running some risks, but that's not always true either. That's really all I have for today. I hope this is beneficial. I hope that we're all getting our exercise on a regular basis. And if this is something that can help us to gain just a little more edge to improve it, whether, we're just lifting 2.5 pounds of weight 1 or 2 times a week, or whether you're a bodybuilder, anything that can kind of give you a little edge to just help you to sustain the healthy lifestyles and to sustain the choices that you're making that are beneficial to your health. We want to jump on those and make sure we're doing everything we can to maximize those. If we find supplements that come out that are really dangerous or don't have proven benefit, I bring those to the attention of the podcast as well. For today, that's all I have. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up, send a message via any of our social media platforms, or go to our website, thebmipodcast.com. We'll be happy to respond. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Dr. Drew Crawford. Join me next week as we go beyond measurements and image to build healthier lifestyles and elevate your well-being on the BMI Podcast. See you then. The BMI Podcast is provided for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute providing medical advice or professional services. Be sure to check out our description below for our website and social media platforms.